Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Patrick Donohoe. Welcome to the Well Standard podcast. And it's going to be a good interview today. We are in the third season of 2018, where we have been talking about a English philosopher back in the 1600s who was shaking up society at the time by writing either anonymously or under a pen name his view of the inalienable rights that eventually became part, his teachings, his words, his writings eventually became part of the Declaration of Independence. And my study has really helped me create a parallel to what people are naturally seeking when it comes to wealth building and their career and so forth. So we've been talking about it all year. If you guys are new to the podcast, go and check out the previous episodes. If you want to kind of get some more information about the actual philosophy, go back and check out the last two episodes where I kind of went off by myself and really made sure that the audience was hearing some or understanding some of the things that we were trying to get across with the various guests. But today, I was actually debating breaking it into two podcasts because it's quite lengthy, but it was an action-packed interview, and it was with James Arthur Ray, who some of you may have heard of before. He's been on Oprah a few times. He's been on Larry King Live. He became, relatively famous back in 2006 and 2007 with the release of the film documentary motivational thing called The Secret. And then tragically in 2009, he went to prison, and he went to prison because a couple of people passed away at one of his seminars. So it's an interesting story and great interview, very knowledgeable guy. You guys are gonna love it. But a couple announcements. First off, the audiobook for the book I just released in July called Heads I Win, Tails You Lose, a financial strategy to reignite the American dream is on Audible. So you can check it out on Audible as well as iTunes. And so I'd love your support. And if you get a chance, leave a review, get the word out. It'd be awesome. So the other announcement is the Cashflow Wealth Summit. Cashflow Wealth Summit is right around the corner, September 20th and 21st. It's an event that I put on for the last several years. This is our fifth summit. And I started doing it with my good friends, Andy Tanner and Tom Wheelwright, who have been on the show before. And it's awesome. We have a bunch of speakers. I think there's like 25 or 26 at this point. Jim Rickards is one of the keynotes. Who's very knowledgeable about the economy, has written a number of books. So I can't wait to hear his perspective of what's going on today. So definitely check that out. It's actually free to register. You can watch everything for free online. And as I said, it'll be September 20th and 21st. Okay, so let's kind of get into this interview. Property is a principle that I believe is very important to understand. And it's not owning real estate. It's not owning a piece of land. It's essentially the material world. John Locke existed back when, there's still horse and buggies. So as he looked at property was essentially the material world. And sometimes it's immaterial, but typically it's the combination of the right to life and being free. And those two things create a dynamic in the mind where, when combined with the physical world, creates things. And it creates, whether it's technology or whether it's a service or whether it's another type of product. Okay, the idea is that the mind of man in that environment operates differently than if it was in an unfree environment. And then where people's right to life wasn't respected. So we really dive into, what wealth is, what property is, and how it relates to our overall sense of fulfillment and level of happiness. And so I think you guys are going to enjoy the interview. And it's going to be long, so you may have to break it up a little bit. But without further ado, I'm going to get into an interview with a really good guy, James Arthur Ray. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the 2018 seasons of the Wealth Standard Podcast, celebrating the principles of life, liberty, and property. You are listening to Season 3, Property.
So it's my pleasure to welcome James Arthur Ray. James, I think your reputation probably does precede this interview, and I've actually talked a lot about some of your books as well as principles way back when I started this podcast in 2007. And I'm really excited to talk to you and to talk through our focus on the principle of property for this season. But I thought that it'd be really good for you to, maybe tell your story, especially for those that don't know you or your name and your history, because I think there's a lot of lessons and a lot of amazing insights that many people can glean from it. So would you mind going into that?
Yeah. How much time do we have? Because my story is kind of epic.
Well, thankfully iTunes doesn't cap us.
So let me give you as much of a condensed version as possible, hitting the highlights. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My father was a Protestant minister, a very dynamic, charismatic man, overbearing in many ways. I was an insecure, skinny, scrawny, buck-toothed kid, introvert, and who got bullied and picked on in school, never fit in. And so in the buckle of the Bible Belt, Tulsa, Oklahoma, right down the street from Oral Roberts University, as the son of a Protestant minister, I picked up the Buddhist Bible when I was 18 years old because I wasn't getting the answers to the questions that I was asking in my Sunday school class. And so that kind of started a quest that I've been on for the rest of my days. And I've had a lot of great experiences. I've had a lot of great coaches and mentors. I've had 6 major coaches and mentors, from everything to business was first. I mean, I went into sales at AT&T and did really well at AT&T, hit the top of my game there, and they made me a national sales trainer. And then from there, I went into management, sales management. I helped build and run their national telemarketing center. And then I went to AT&T School of Business, ended up as a C-suite consultant for AT&T School of Business, working with C-suite leaders on leadership, communication, team performance, all of those types of things that we have to get the results that we want. I leapt off in 92 and started my own business consulting company and was just doing business consulting. Now, all this while I was being mentored and coached in business, I had a real attraction going all the way back to 18 to spiritual traditions and psychology. My schooling was in behavioral sciences. So I always wanted to figure out and find out and understand how the human mind worked. And I thought, as I started devouring all these books, and I've literally read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of books. And, one of my most prized possessions is my library, even yet today. I'm a pretty giving guy, but if you ask me to borrow a book from my library, the answer is always no, because it's my resource and my go-to, and they're all noted and cross-referenced and all those things. But I had this real drive to understand how the universe worked. I studied every great, philosophy, psychology, even quantum physics. And as I continued to grow and learn, then my life began to change. And at some point I decided, hey, I'm going to start sharing this with other people as well. And so after leaving AT&T in 92, primarily doing business consulting, I got into keynote speaking and appearances, which I still do today. And then I got into live events, and I got so busy, I was a co-author of a little phenomenon called The Secret, if you've heard of that. And that went gangbusters. And, believe it or not, it's still huge internationally, even today. And so it was interesting because the law of attraction was about that much of what I taught. And I believe still to this day that my very best material ended up on the cutting room floor because Rhonda Byrne, who is a good friend of mine, had a different vision for the direction that it should go. And so I was blessed to be in that, though, because I had basically played entrepreneurial solitaire for the better part of 2 decades. And I don't know if you've ever played entrepreneurial solitaire, Patrick, but what that is I'm sure many of your viewers have, you take all your credit cards and you throw them out on the bed and you try to figure out which one has a balance left, because at any moment you're going down, you feel like, for the third time. And it had been a real struggle, and, you know, a lot of disappointment and a lot of hard work and a lot of long hours. And then the secret kind of catapulted me into a world arena. And I'm blessed to be a part of that, even though, frankly, I believe that concept, the way it was presented, is very much for beginners. It's much more complex and deep than that. And so that got me onto Oprah a couple of times, Larry King. I was on the Today Show once a month. All of a sudden, my career exploded, and I was the hottest thing since sliced bread. You know, Fortune magazine, you can see the article hanging up behind here, in 2008, said I was a new front runner in leadership and performance. And I was running and gunning and really blessed. I hit the Inc. 500, my team and I, in 2009, with one of the fastest growing, most successful companies in the nation, if not the world. And I had a $10 million business. I had a home, you know, on Mulholland Drive in Beverly Hills, and I had worked really long and hard for the better part of 2 decades, 7 days a week, 16-hour days, to get there. And, you know, in retrospect, I see the arrogance there, because I kind of thought, in the back of my mind, although I may not have articulated this at the time, I thought, hey, I've done all this work and had all this struggle and all this suffering, and now I've arrived, and now it's my time. And I really realize now that the moment you begin to think that is the moment you're about to get the props knocked out from under you. And so, is this too lengthy, Patrick?
No, what I was gonna bring up there is, yeah, you have all of this momentum behind you that's building up to success. And you know, I think mindset changes at different levels of that journey. But there was a guy, he passed away earlier this year in Utah. His name's John Huntsman, and he has, you know, one of the most successful cancer foundations in the world. And he was, you know, at a chemical company that did, you know, a lot of the packaging for McDonald's. Anyway, really successful guy. But one of the principles that I gleaned from him that I'll never forget in one of his books is he never he focused on providing, giving, serving first, and then the resources became available to do that. And it was kind of that cycle, right? So it's one of those things where, you know, you have the resources to provide value to others, but suddenly when the focus isn't others and it's yourself, without regard to others, right, I think things start to unwind. And that's at least was part of the lessons I've learned. But what are your comments on that? I mean, you get to this point where, you know, everything you've worked for, you're achieving. How did your mind start to operate, and how did that lead to, you know, an inevitable correction?
Well, wow, that's a great question. And you know, we're talking about material possibilities here in this phase of your show, and what we can create in the world, right? And literally, I created results that were far beyond what I ever imagined when I started. I would say, to your point as well, and I would corroborate that, you know, people ask me all the time, people would come, I've been blessed to work with over 1 million people from 145 different countries around the world. And a lot of them come to me to learn how to grow a business and make more money. And what I always state, and will still state till the end of my days, is here's the secret to making money. Forget about money. You know, we've been conditioned into this great myth that businesses are in business to turn a profit. That's a myth. Businesses are in business to impact people's lives in a positive way. And so I really don't believe, Patrick, I ever lost sight of that. And in fact, I know I didn't. Now my intention was always good. My implementation, not always as good. but my intention always was to help people. And my greatest remuneration still to this day, and always will be, the people who say, hey, you've helped me double, triple my business. You've helped me with my relationship. You've helped me lose 100 pounds, whatever those things may be. And because I teach quintessential principles, and they are applicable to both life and business. And that's why, my whole focus now is on leadership and performance, because my definition of leadership is that you've got to lead your life first and successfully, and then you can lead a business successfully, if that makes sense to you.
No, it totally does. And it's hitting on something that I love to talk through, and it still kind of confuses me, which is the paradox of actually making money or wealth, which is you think it's for you, but it's really the more impact you have on others, the better off you are. And I think people naturally, from a survival instinct, are, looking out for themselves to survive. And that instinct is inside of us. At the same time, once you get beyond having your, physiological needs, that's when the connections associated with, how you do gain come into play. And I've always, the paradox is the best way to gain is for others to gain. And that's, I always try to think of that. And when you establish yourself, especially in your capacity where you are improving business, you're improving relationships, you're improving livelihood, and not on a scale of like 5 people or 10 people or 100 people, but, millions, I would say, because of the success of that, I don't even know what you call it, documentary/film, The Secret, now the responsibility, right, is huge, right? Because you're essentially now upping your game to take who you are, what you know, and be of value to a lot of people. And that's where, I don't know, is it losing sight of that, even for, even an intention, right? Is losing sight of that the cause of some of the lessons you've had?
Well, I think there's a lot of that is a cause, and there's other things as well. But if I were to kind of pinpoint, the major cause is that I lost perspective. And what I mean by that is that I started to lose gratitude for what I had and what I'd been given. I always loved people. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And yet I was tired, man. I was on the road over 200 days a year. People were pulling at me everywhere. At the peak of The Secret, I'd go into the gym and I'd have, an hour and a half to get a workout in, and I had to hit a meeting, a conference call, hard stop. And people would come up to me and go, hey, aren't you James Arthur Ray? I'd say, yeah, I am. Well, I know this is your personal time and I don't want to bother you, but let me ask you a quick question. And I'd be running through the airport late for a flight and say, Jay, can we take a picture real quick? And if you don't, you're an asshole. If you do, you're way behind and you're missing your flight, or you're not getting to your meeting, or you're not getting your workout in. And so I started getting disgruntled, and I was just tired. I was really physically tired. And, I wrote a book, my last book, Harmonic Wealth. There's a title for your show. Harmonic Wealth was a New York Times bestseller. It hit the top of the list in 5 days after its release. And my whole intention for that book was to redefine wealth. Because if you go back to the origins of the word wealth, if I were to ask 99% of the people what's wealth mean, they would instantly say money. Well, it doesn't mean money. You go back to the origins and it means well-being. And so, I coach a lot of 7-8 figure performers, and they don't have a lot of wealth. They have a lot of money, but they don't have a lot of well-being. And because here's the fact, going back to something to play off of what you said, Patrick, there's research out there that proves, well-documented research, that after about $75,000 a year, you don't get any happier. And in many cases, you get more miserable, because every single dollar more you make, and at one point at the peak, I was personally bringing home $4 million a year. That's a lot of money, but I can tell you that's a lot of responsibility too. And what comes with that is a lot of headache. And so, my company was making 10, it cost me 6 to make 10, and I was keeping 4. That's pretty good margins. But nonetheless, was I any happier than I was when I was making 300,000? No, not really. In fact, in many cases, less happy, because I had a condo on the beach in Kona, Hawaii, the big island, and I hadn't been there in 2 years because I was too busy.
And that's the whole, it's kind of, it's disharmony at that point.
Correct.
And it's one of the, and that's what I was saying before is, it's this journey along life, right? Where you establish yourself, you learn, you get educated, whether it's formal or informal, and you figure out ways to provide value to others, right? And you start to grow and increase, and you get to the point where, you maybe lose sight of what initially allowed you to provide that value in the first place. The bigger you get, because I would say, for me at least, I look at, when you do get to those levels, it's not a headache that can't be solved. There's a lot of aspirin out there, right? Because there's lots of businesses that are more than 10 million bucks. I mean, there's
right.
billion-dollar businesses. You have Amazon that's at $1 trillion. You have these structures that are out there that can do that, but at the same time, how are you going to learn the value of that unless you have to experience some friction, right? In an environment that makes you aware that, hey, what caused the wealth in the first place, isn't what's going to cause even more down the road, or even to maintain what you've caused in the first place.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, Patrick, sorry to interrupt you, what caused the wealth in the first place, if we're calling money wealth, which I'm going to say wealth is more than just money. Money's a part of it. Yeah. But what caused the success in the first place was you. Right. And so, how many times have we seen the Sean Penns taking swings at, if you remember back years ago, he was taking swings at reporters who were sticking cameras in his face. Well, who made you famous, Sean? Right. I mean, and I nowhere near a Sean Penn, but I got a taste of that. And I know, I understand it, because at some point in time, you're like, damn, I got to take care of me. And who's going to take care of the guy who's taking care of everyone else? Mm-hmm. And you've got to keep it in perspective. But here's something else that I'll say to play off of what you alluded to. And this is not going to be popular, but I'm going to challenge your listener to write it down. It's not going to be popular. You're probably not going to like it, but it's true nonetheless. Pain is the mother of all growth. That's a fact. Now, I'll give you a simple example. Go into the gym and tell your trainer that you want to get in peak performance and fitness, but you don't want to sweat, you don't want to burn, you don't want to get out of breath. And they'll tell you, don't let the door hit your butt on the way out, right? Because it's not going to happen. Pain is the mother of all growth. And how do you build a business? The same way you build a body, by pushing up against greater and greater resistance. And so that resistance that I confronted when I was at the top is something that I had to learn to deal with and push through. And I sometimes was doing okay, other times not so well. But it all did unravel. And to come back to the story, if you'd like me to, for those who don't know the story, in 2009, I came into a 5-day event that we were holding, my company and I, and we had an experiential event called a sweat lodge, and it was really just about that much of the entire 5 days. The whole 5 days was a deep dive into our own psyche and into our own childhood scars and unresolved emotional issues and traumas, and how to learn to reframe those and integrate those and become better because of them. Because if pain is the mother of all growth, which it is, I can guarantee you that you are who you are today because of the scars you have. Your scars are a symbol of strength. I don't want people around me that don't have any scars. Those people scare me,
They're going to get some wounds.
That's right. And they're not going to have any compassion whatsoever for mine. Yeah. Right. So at the end of that 5-day experience, we did this sweat lodge, which was just kind of a sizzle event, graduation event. We'd done it for 5 years prior. Something went incredibly sideways wrong. And 3 people ended up losing their lives. And so here we are. It's my event. It's my activity. It's my company. I'm the leader. Therefore, I'm responsible. Now, that's the price of leadership. So again, people tell me all day long, oh, I want to build a leader. I want to build a big company. I want to be Elon Musk. Okay. Well, look at Bill Gates and how much he's been in court, right? Look at Zuckerberg and how much he's been in court. Because when things go sideways, see, the problem, the challenge with leadership is that you are held accountable for a lot of things that you have no control over. I don't care if you're at Amazon or Enron or wherever you are. I mean, but you're held accountable. You know, when things went sideways at BP Oil, the CEO was in the crosshairs. Well, the CEO doesn't know what's going on out on the drill. He's so far removed from that, but there's one guy in the crosshairs, and in this case, that was me. And so you got to shoulder that, and you got to step up to that. And if you can't step up to it, then you better stand down, because that's the price of leadership. And so, you know, it went terribly wrong. And the major pain there, Patrick, which you never saw in the media, and you maybe saw a little bit of it in the documentary. I don't know if you've seen the documentary.
Not yet. We're going to post some links to it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, on Netflix. It's called Enlighten Us, and it's my story. And you see a little bit of it there. They told a little bit more of the story than the media did. But man, I lost 3 friends. I lost 3 clients on my watch. I mean, if you can imagine, there's not a day goes by that I don't think about that. And I don't think about what could have been done better or differently, or what if I hadn't have done that activity, or all these what ifs. But, you know, as in a position of leadership, you can't what if, and you can't throw your team under the bus. You can't, you know, do anything besides take what I call absolute responsibility. And I did, and the state of Arizona came after me, and everything started to unravel. My Inc. 500 company went away. I lost my life savings. I ended up homeless. I lost my reputation. All my so-called friends and colleagues became ghosts. Literally, you know, one week they're all wanting to do JVs and wanting to be up next to me and work with me. Next day, I've got some disease. And so it was harsh, man. And I ended up losing my liberty and went to prison. They charged me with manslaughter, which, with all due respect, was absolutely ludicrous, because manslaughter is intentional harm. Well, there's not a businessman on the planet who's going to intentionally harm his clients. That's not a good move, right? Well, the jury said, no, we can't find any malintent here whatsoever. But what was a lesser included in that was negligence. And negligence basically says, hey, there were things that were overlooked. I agree. There were things that could have been done better. I agree. And guess who's responsible? It's me. You know, God, I wish they would have been different. And God, I wish I would have known. And on and on and on. And now you have 2 choices. When things go sideways, you either come out bitter and angry, or you become awake and you learn and you grow and get grateful. And I choose the latter. And it's not easy. It was not easy to go to prison. I got stories. I went for 2 years. They wanted 30. So I'm pretty blessed, because 2 compared to 30 is nothing. And yet it was the most heinous experience I've ever had in my entire life. I've seen things that guys like you and me could never imagine in a million years. And so I came out 5 years ago and kind of wasn't sure what I was going to do, but very quickly realized that I had to get back on the horse and get back at it. Because here's the thing, Patrick, when you know your purpose, you don't quit. And that's, even though it might feel easier to do so sometimes.
So if you had one word or one lesson that came from that, what would that be?
Wow, there's so many of them, but I'll talk to the entrepreneur, because 95+% of the people I work with are entrepreneurs, and I'm going to assume a lot of your audience is as well. Yep. I would say keep your eyes wide open, because you think it won't or can't happen to you, it could happen to anybody. I mean, there's not one power in this universe, Patrick, that can guarantee that you or I are going to wake up tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
Now hopefully you will, and hopefully I will too, and we, but we don't like to think about that. We want to compartmentalize that and ignore that. But the fact is, I could get in my car. I've got a meeting to go to as soon as we're done here. I get in my car and go out here right after this interview, God forbid, and a kid could run out in front of the car chasing a ball, and I hit the kid, and you'll lose everything. You'll lose everything. And even though you had no intention of harm, and it could happen to any of us. And so you have to not live in fear, but you have to learn that you've been sold. Here it is. We're talking about material gain in this part of your series. You've been sold what I call the great lie, all caps, the great lie. You want to hear what the great lie is?
Go for it.
In 2009, July, I sit down with my money manager, and he said, James, congratulations. You can retire for the rest of your life comfortably. I had $15 million in the bank. I had way more net worth than that. I had a $10 million business. I had, a New York Times bestseller. I had a great reputation. I was the media's golden boy. Little did I know that in less than 90 days, it would all be gone. Every dime. In fact, worse than that, I came out of prison 5 years ago, $20 million in debt. Broke looked good to me from where I was.
Well, let me ask you this. So, you up to that point, you studied the universe, you studied psychology, you studied human behavior. You had a sense or a conviction as to how it worked. So in theory, this, I would say, an environment of the bottom, right, relative to where you were 90 days prior, what did that tell you? What did you go through in your mind in relation to, how things work and the output, circumstance and your role in that?
Well, Man, there's at least 5 questions in that question.
I tried to get
let me see if I can peel it apart. I'll answer the last one first. My role in that is absolute responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I take absolute responsibility for all of it, and I see the perfection of it in retrospect. I see the perfection of it because, and I can only speak for me. I talk about this in the documentary. In fact, it's the very end of the documentary where I make this statement, which is taken out of an entire, how they edit and they take things out of an entire context. And I got a lot of heat for it because it was misinterpreted, but I can't speak for those who died or for their families, and my heart goes out to them, or anyone who was hurt by that situation. They can only speak for themselves, and I can only speak for myself. And so from my perspective, I could have not learned as much. I couldn't have grown as much. I couldn't have found any other situation where I could practice what I had studied and taught for the majority of my life than the one that I went into. And I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. Are you familiar?
Oh yeah, Hero's Journey. Yep.
Hero's Journey. I mean, if you're going to be a world teacher, which I'm not saying that I am, but if you're going to be a public figure or a world teacher in podcast form like yourself, or in business form like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or whomever, then you're going to have to go through greater trials and challenges to develop the abilities, because we don't grow smelling the roses and drinking fine wine. I mean, I like those things as well as anybody. We grow the most in the crucible of challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's our challenges that cause us to get to the core. And so without that fall, you said that earlier, and it's a good term. I mean, it is the hero's journey, and that's why, mythology is so powerful, and I believe we've lost our mythology in the modern world. There was a time where we as young men, and I'm not saying I'm that young anymore, but at one point we, coming into manhood around 13 years of age or something, we would have had to go through a rite of passage. Well, the rite of passage now is called how many followers on Instagram, or whatever, I mean, we've lost all of that. And that's unfortunate.
Even more than that, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't want to.
No, please do.
Point, but in the middle of that, you look at the rite of passage, right? Going to that point you made, that rite of passage had pain involved with it, whether it was hiking a mountain, whether it was going to hunt something, whether it was, some ritual, right, that allowed a person to experience fear and experience pain, right? And through that, they would become a man, right?
That's right. That's right. And unfortunately, we've lost. I'm starting a 5-day leadership event on Sunday coming up in a couple of days, and it's called Leadership for the Future. And my whole perspective is that the leader of the future has to be different than what we've currently defined as leadership. We are in sore need of leadership. In my humble opinion, you might agree or disagree, but I believe we're sorely in need of leadership. You go back to when I was 6 years old, and I remember John F. Kennedy saying, hey, we're going to the moon. Not because it's easy, but because it's hard, and it'll bring out the best within us. And I mean, we had big moonshots, we had big visions, we had a bigger perspective. And now what are we talking about? Well, let's build a wall, and let's get more minimum wage, and let's have more entitlement, and wham. I mean, we've lost our warrior spirit, and we've become wimps, and I know that's a technical term, but nonetheless, our lifestyles have made us weak. And consequently, because we don't have the rite of passage, because we don't have the mythology anymore, because we don't have to earn our way to manhood or womanhood, then we just have this entitlement attitude. And we've got so many people running around, particularly younger generations, whom I love, and I'm not disrespecting. I think the millennials can possibly be some of the greatest leaders that we've seen in modern times. And they're going to have to change their mindset dramatically, because I have a lot of them work on my team, and there's, and I'm not generalizing that there's always exceptions, but there's a lot of lack of work ethic. There's a lot of impatience. There's a lot of things that social media, I love social media used properly too. I'm not disrespecting that, but everyone wants to be the next Justin Bieber, throw up a YouTube video. What are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a YouTube star. Well, what the hell is that? I mean, what value are you going to provide to the world? And so I'm kind of on a tangent here, but I think I had to go through my own loss of everything to gain everything, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it totally does. And that's, I've talked on the show before, and you probably know this metaphor well, which is which is entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics, right? Dying, and then the state you become, or whatever it becomes in the biological world after that death. And so tree falls in the forest, it becomes part of the forest. Tree falls in a swamp, because the pressure of a swamp is so much more intense than the forest. Okay, tree becomes coal, coal becomes a diamond. So it's that idea where the greater the pressure, and I think, example is the youth and the tremendous pressure of a 13-year-old, or I have a almost 14-year-old daughter and 12-year-old daughter going through, their puberty times, and that pressure, okay, for males and females, the environment is really what determines, okay, what they end up being. And if you look at, an extreme example, it's the Middle East, right? So if you have that type of, pressure, okay, that they're naturally going through, and you have the ideology of hatred and killing. I mean, look at what they're going to become. And that's where, I would say people have a tremendous opportunity as far as their youth is concerned. But in regards to the cycle of life and actually going through difficult times and experiencing pain, I think people are afraid of pain. And I think pain is, as you have mentioned, as you've experienced probably to a much higher degree than I have, okay, it teaches you things that are paramount to growth. And that's where I look at, the millennial generation, and they shun away from pain. They don't want to experience. They do what's possible to avoid it, not looking, bad on their social media profile, not making a mistake. I mean, people are killing themselves in that age range, okay, because, something looks bad in a picture or something was said about them. I agree with you. And so let's maybe transition, since we don't have, hours to do this, let's maybe transition, because I do believe that leadership is one of those ideas that would change a lot of people. And it's not just one leader, or two leaders, or three leaders, okay, but I think it's leadership in general. So would you maybe pivot? I think we made our point, right, with some of the things that you've gone through. How have you transitioned out of that into this push to develop leadership, and then maybe start with defining what you consider leadership?
Well, let me start off by defining what leadership is not. Okay. Leadership is not the number of followers. Leadership is not the number of likes. Leadership is not a bunch of people agreeing with you. Leadership is not being the most popular. Leadership, at the bottom line, in my opinion, is the willingness to sacrifice for a cause and a calling far beyond your own comforts and needs. It's the willingness to give every single thing you have to a cause and a calling, not a career. There's a big difference to a cause and a calling, and to be able to sacrifice beyond your own comforts and needs. And that's what is so frightening for a lot of people, is that they don't want to suffer. Well, there's a lot of salvation in suffering. Believe me, I know that, because it peels away the bullshit and it gets you to the core of what's really, really important. Mm-hmm. Because, I talked about the great lie, and I didn't really finish that thought, and I won't go back into it. But the great lie is, just to circle back to that, my house. It's not your house. My business. It's not your business. My bank account. It's not your bank account. And I stand in front of audience and jokingly say, how many of you guys have ever had a woman that you called your wife and now she's someone else's wife? And they all laugh and raise their hand. Not all of them, but a lot of them, right? Well, she's not your wife either. It's not yours. At best, we're temporary custodians of these things for a time, and every single one of them is going to go away. And believe, I had all this millions and millions, so it appeared, but did I really have it? Well, no, I didn't, because now it's gone. And so what you do have, and this comes back to leadership, and this is where our school system is failing us miserably, because our traditional school system has not changed hardly at all, if at all, since we were training people to go to work in factories. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact. And so all these people are chasing the market and the money. But Gallup tells us that 71% of the people surveyed are miserable in their work. So, that strategy is a surefire way to end up in the 71% club. Mm-hmm. What I say is find the meaning and let the money follow the meaning. Now, that may sound a little Pollyanna, but it's not, because at the end of the day, what we want and what your children want, your 14-year-old wants, and what all of us really want, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, is we want to be happy and fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And all the Mercedes and airplanes and money and houses are not going to bring that. I'm not impressed on Instagram when people are going, oh, look at my plane. Well, that's a money pit. I've been there. I didn't have a plane, but I've been there where I've had all these accoutrements, mm-hmm. and it's a money, and I don't want to go there again. I'm not anti those if that's what you want to do, but have eyes wide open, mm-hmm. and here's true leadership. Find your calling. Find your purpose, what I call your powerful transforming purpose, or your PTP. And it's been there all along. if you look at all the way back to when you were a child, there were certain things, Patrick, that you were attracted to. There were certain things that you kind of had an innate ability in. And I believe any of us can become good at whatever we choose to become good at, given enough time, 10,000 hours, according to Anders Ericsson, but can we become great? Probably not. Can we become masterful? Even less, unless you've got some kind of unique gift and genius in a particular area. Find that first, and our school systems and society are not conditioning us to find that.
Since you studied psychology, can you throw the hierarchy of needs, the Maslow model, into the mix? Because that model is, physiological safety, relationships, self-esteem, right? And then self-actualization. So is there because I agree with you. And I think that the self-actualized phase that has been talked about for a long time, the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, you can go back for a long time and find a lot of these teachings, but that self-actualized phase, is it possible to get there without experiencing the other levels first in sequence? Because I see what you're saying, right? And I've made the same statements where, they're taking pictures with their rings and pictures with money all over the place. And, and I think that's the drive for self-esteem and self-worth, right? In a sense. Is it possible to circumvent that and get to just go right to self-actualization? Does that make sense? Because I've asked myself those questions and I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And in my opinion, which is all it is, take it or leave it, is that it's all part of it. So when people say, what's the number one quality that you have to live a meaningful life, even to be a successful entrepreneur, success being a broader term than, hey, I've got a certain ring or car, but true success without fulfillment is not success. I'm sorry.
Yep.
And